Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, Utah's legislature reaches the halfway mark as committees prioritize budget requests and tackle numerous controversial issues. The number of new COVID-19 cases continues to decrease as the state ramps up vaccine efforts. And the U.S. Senate hears evidence and prepares to vote in the divisive impeachment trial of former President Trump. Good evening and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Jasen Lee, journalist with the Deseret News and co-host of Voices of Reason podcast. Maura Carabello, president of the Exoro Group, and Matt Canham, managing editor of the Salt Lake Tribune. So glad to be with you all today, particularly talk about the legislative session. We officially hit the halfway mark. We're over it. Not that we count those days, but there's a lot going on right now. And Matt, I want to start with what just happened at the end of the week, okay? Because all the committees have been meeting. They've been hearing all the requests for funding that are going into the state. But this is the week when they start prioritizing those items. And then they present it to really the committee that controls all the money, the Executive Appropriations Committee. Talk about a couple of those proposals that are coming forward and a little bit about that process.
So this is, we start the session by collecting a wish list. Everyone comes out to the legislature, especially in a year like this one where we have some money. So now it's the committee presents its list and we start getting serious. The governor, we have a new governor who has his own proposals. And so now we're going to start figuring out where legislative leaders are going to put their stamp. There's some money, we talked a little bit before the show about double tracking on Frontrunner, which is a proposal the governor came up with before this session, something that is expensive. I believe it's $350 million. But this is a year where we have enough cash where you can actually do something like that, and it would have a huge impact.
To continue the conversation of process, some things to watch for next week. The new budget comes out, the new indication of actual money that will be close to the money we have to spend. So that'll go back to the subcommittees. They may give another set of recommendations, but really the secret here is the executive appropriations process. And we're going to see funding of projects that we probably haven't heard discussed very much in committee here. So the power of the executive committee is really something to watch, and the final budget numbers will be out next week.
The consensus, we will know exactly what they have to spend, which is interesting. I want to get into at least one of these points that Matt just talked about too. A lot of money funneling into clean air initiatives, this double tracking of Frontrunner, for example. Jason, talk about that, because there are 22 bills right now, all sides of the aisle, trying to get to cleaner air in the state of Utah.
Environment has always been a really key issue in Utah, particularly as, for instance, I cover business. Businesses always want to do something to improve quality of life. And when they try to recruit businesses to come to Utah, one of the key factors they mention is businesses think about the problem we have with our clean air, our environment, and if we can put some real hefty money into addressing these issues, I think it goes a long way to improving our economic stability in the years moving forward. I also think that education is one of these things that they've talked about putting a lot of money in there for teachers, because education is so important, again, in getting our young people to a state where they can be best ready for employment. Those are the kinds of things that are going to be important this year, and it'll be interesting to see how much money actually is appropriated for those kinds of programs.
Thinking about businesses, one of the air quality bills that I think is most interesting is the idea of adding more electric charging stations around our state. I think there's $6 million they're asking for. We'll see if they get that much. But if you're thinking about the future and you're recruiting businesses and you're thinking about a green economy, we're going to have more electric cars. You have to be able to charge it up in a vast state like ours. And the only way that's going to happen is if the state invests. And this is a year where they actually can do that.
And Jason, as you said, it's a really big deal that we're seeing so much potential investment in the area of air quality, particularly from the Republicans in the legislature. So I want to applaud that this has become a bipartisan issue and that we're also seeing investment. The one thing I think as citizens pay attention to this, to solve air quality, it's twofold. One, an investment in infrastructure infrastructure and program, but two, we have to change our behavior. And that's often part of what we miss, right? We're watching the legislature and thinking, oh, it's solved. No, we're a big part of the air quality problem as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And inadvertently, we've probably had some help in this because COVID has made many of us work from home, like myself, and we don't have as many cars on the road. And generally speaking, our cars are the biggest influence, and we have the biggest impact on, negatively speaking, on our environment. And if we can do something about moderating that, then we can also go a long way toward addressing our long-term environmental issues.
Mm-hmm. There's two parts to this issue that Maura was talking about, Matt. I think it's interesting too because it is both sides of the aisle that are proposing these bills, but also, as you alluded to, the business community is all in on this, not just for their own businesses, but for the recruitment side, for the retention side, which is something that's developed recently. Yeah,
and I think there's a reality that the world's changing. I mean, GM said, I believe by 2035, they're not going to sell gasoline-powered cars. The world's changing. We have to get ready. And I do think we have a track record in this state of looking ahead, of trying to plan for these kind of major changes. And so I think this is what we're seeing here. There's a lot of bills on air quality monitors, where getting the information to the people about where we can make improvements, I think those things make a lot of sense. We'll see what happens. I say other thing with the budget is we might see a little bit of a slow process of seeing those priorities because there's still an internal, or at least a not public conversation yet about how big a tax cut are we going to have. And that looms over everything. Until you know how big the tax cut is, you don't know how much other cash you have.
Yeah. What's so interesting about that, Maura, is that we keep hearing about this tax cut. I'm not even going to ask you details, because we don't know details.
Exactly.
But we do know this is on the agenda.
Right, and it's being repeated and repeated by legislative leadership, and it's definitely on the agenda. But you're right, we have very few details about this. And again, I'll repeat, this next week becomes critical because we switch a little to executive appropriations, and we switch a little bit to big decision making by a small group of people, and we'll see a different set of dialogue coming up in the latter half as also it speeds up. And a reminder, we've talked about this before, but what an unusual session this is. If you go up there, the halls are rather empty, you're going with appointments only, and to the good of public policy, the conversations and the deals that are made in the hallways, which are usually dismissed as inside baseball, actually serve the public really well. Being able to call 15 disparate people at one time as the speaker and say, are you in consensus? Are you in consensus? Is really important. And there's a physicality to that is completely missing. And as they moved into quick sifting of bills, and as they make decisions more and more from an executive point of view, it's going to be a challenge, I think.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about cars for just a second, just to start talking about bills. An article that ran in the Tribune here just today, Matt. So it's interesting. A lot of us, we have to register our cars every year, and the tax commission, they thought maybe they'd save $500,000 in sending us a postcard telling us they're not going to send us a postcard telling us it's time to register. Turns out about 1 in 4 people in the state of Utah didn't remember.
Yes, I mean, the hard part is, how often do you look at your license plate and see the little month tag? I don't even know what month I'm supposed to register my car. It's been the same month for years. Like, I don't even know what it is. I wait for the postcard. And apparently, Jason and I and a lot of other Utahns have been doing the same thing. And even House Speaker Brad Wilson forgot, didn't register his truck. This is funny. It shows how much influence a government can have by a simple act of sending a piece of mail.
Mm-hmm. Jay's talk about that, because I know
I was one of those people who got the car that I was late. I had forgotten. I was a month behind already, and so then I had to go get a temporary. What's really funny is you get used to certain things. I'm not sure what caused them to think that $500,000 in the grand scheme of a many billion-dollar budget was worth doing, but it probably is one of the less popular decisions they've ever made, and I will be so glad to be getting that postcard next year, because I will do the right thing as I'm supposed to But I'm like Matt, I had forgotten what month it was, and I think it's December, but, and I got it in late January, so I'm like, well, I'm already late. You have to get the formal thing, and then you put it in the window. It's a big thing. I'll be glad to get that postcard to you.
Yeah, Maura, it was kind of funny. The sponsor of the bill actually took a picture of the Speaker of the House of his truck that had expired and said, here's the reason for.
Yeah, I too will own that I need to be babysat on this issue.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's interesting. Let's talk about a couple other bills that have come forward here. That one's resolved. We'll start getting our reminders again, funded by the legislature. But I just have to say, because it's come up finally, Matt, Space Force. Because we have to talk about Space Force. It's back. I know no one can say it without kind of a little smile.
So the Biden administration has signed a raft of executive orders overturning a ton of President Trump's decisions, but not Space Force. Space Force might be here to stay. Yeah. And Utah is going to be one of the first states, it looks like, to recognize Space Force. And I believe there are members at Hill Air Force Base who are now inductees into Space Force. And I think I find it to be funny. I'm sure there are serious issues that Space Force can actually help us with. But it's one of those things that is now going to be part of our federal bureaucracy.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be permanent there,
it's
too,
going to be permanent.
as you just mentioned. And Maura, former General Burton, who oversaw our National Guard for a long time, is the one sponsoring this thing, saying this helps us get federal money to Hill Air Force Base in the state of Utah.
I'm sure it does. I was hoping you'd pass over this. I have a hard time, for some reason, not chuckling whenever we talk about Space Force. I'm sure the underlying issues and our competition globally on these issues are very important, but the optics on it right now maybe need to be readjusted.
Yeah.
Oh, the hard part is, I mean, it's because it's part of our military. And when we think of our military, we think of confronting an adversary. So when you think of Space Force, you think of confronting an adversary, and then the question is, who's the adversary in space?
Oh, I've seen the late night movies.
Right.
I know.
We've seen this one.
But there are probably lots of serious issues about, how we interact in space, the amount of satellites, the defense mechanisms we can and probably are already using in space. But it is just, it's just humorous.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to mention, though, is the Air Force has already been tasked. They've been, not necessarily formally, they've been Space Force. And in fact, they will be the conduit when they grow this bureaucracy. I don't know that the money they spend on creating an entirely new bureaucracy, a new department, is necessarily the best way to spend this money, because you could just add to the appropriations as given to the Air Force already and just have it be kind of a subset of what they do. And so I'm a little surprised, and to me it seems like a bit of folly, considering all the major issues our country has to deal with right now, and certainly in our state as well, that we are going to put so much effort and so much emphasis on creating what many of us chuckle at when we first hear. And I think a lot of people in the country are wondering, why are we doing this when there are so many other issues that we could be tackling?
Let's get to a much more serious issue that we talked about on our show last week. Maura, let's go to these women in sports. There was this bill that we've talked about here where it was making so transgender athletes would not be able to play on the team for which they identify. But big development in the committee yesterday morning on that bill.
Right. So in the committee, they actually took out collegiate athletes and kept it focused. And I'm just going to correct in that it's not transgender athletes, it's transgender girls. So it's even more targeted than that. And I think that there are a number of things that are very troubling with this. We have very credible institutions but not limited to the Olympic Committee, the National and International Olympic Committee, the NCAA, their advocacy groups. This is a challenging and complex issue, and it does not lack for policy. There are many serious-minded groups who have laid down the policy on this. I think second, concerningly, whenever a bill shows up in committee with a strong note from legislative attorneys that say this is likely to have litigation attached to it, it means that it's already an area that has established policy. I don't think the legislature is the right entity to be discussing this issue, and I think that it's certainly leading to a lawsuit, which leads us to believe that once again it's a message bill. It's targeted, and it's targeted at high school children, and I think that this is not the place to have this conversation in the legislature. We have neither the aptitude nor the expertise nor the need to have this piece of legislation. So perpetuating a message bill that's focused on high school girls, I think, is unconscionable. But more importantly, the legislature, in areas that we have settled statutes, in areas that we have policies that come from very thoughtfully considered agencies, I would suggest that the representatives go petition that agency, have a dialogue. There's a lot of conversations to be had in the area of transgender athletes, but have those with expertise. Don't once again, as a legislature, take it upon yourself, particularly to send messages.
It's interesting, Matt, when the collegiate sports was stripped out of this bill yesterday, you know, there have been some arguments that maybe made the lawsuit even stronger since it's targeted just at high school students. Just
at high school trans girls. And I think that it's, you know, it will lead to lawsuits, but it will lead to lawsuits not just in Utah. This isn't a Utah issue. This is a Republican issue spread throughout our country. This is something that Congress is talking about. This is something that conservative media is talking about. And I find it surprising this would be the issue that comes up in this time of our, you know, country, but it does happen that things catch people's attention, that they do feel that there's something to debate, and kind of like what Jasen said in the last story, this isn't near the top of the list of issues we need to deal with. To my understanding, there is not a trans girl participating in a high school sport that we can point to and say, this is the one we're talking about. At committee, there were a couple girls who testified that they participated against a trans girl in a cross-state competition, but that's the only example that I've heard. This isn't a common occurrence.
It would seem to be blatantly discriminatory, isn't it? Because we are targeting specifically women. I'm surprised that constitutionally this would hold muster, because you can't just choose one segment of the population to focus your law on. And you know, this, I don't know how this is going to progress. I'm really surprised, as Matt mentioned, that this is one of those issues that has been taken up particularly by the conservative side that they think is actually going to get somewhere.
For just a moment, keeping on the theme of sports, the House okayed the change for Dixie State University. Maura?
This has been a tough issue. It's an issue of sort of a conversation of social equity. One thing I think that's interesting, I'm going to dive right into racism on this, because one of the things we've found from behavioral scientists as we talk about whether it's use of force or whether we talk about affordable housing issues or whether we talk about the names of our universities, social behavioral sciences have found that the one thing we are most reactive to talking about is if there's any indication that we might be biased or racist. And so I think that's the underlying of this is are we feeling accused and indicted personally about our feelings? But the realities, I thought, that have come through in that, yeah, those are the underpinnings of some of this language. And the social consciousness that we're feeling right now in the United States, I'm glad to see it's hit the shores of Utah. I recognize how hard this conversation is for those who were born and raised in Utah. I think it's an incredibly compelling argument that students are saying, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to graduate from a university and claim that that's the name on it. So I think that the legislature has done a good job to work through it. I was a little suspicious whether they would be able to. And what they've done is kick off a process to find a name that everyone can wrap around. But it is time in the United States to continue to have these conversations about our biasness or the language that we use or what symbols are enormously powerful, as is language, and it's time to continue that conversation.
There's also, to this point, Matt, there is a bill dealing with Native American symbols in public education in particular, encouraging the groups to come together and to eliminate those over time.
Right, and I think that this is exactly, you know, the offshoot of the same thing that Maura was talking about. We are taking a long overdue look at the language we use, at the symbols we use, and think about what it means to a broader group of people. And that is a healthy process for any country to go through. It's a healthy process for any city or university to go through. And, you know, people are going to have different viewpoints. People are going to have different, they're going to be sentimental about certain things. And I think that one thing that's been nice is there has seemed to have been generally an adult conversation about this at all levels. At the university level, school level, we saw with Bountiful High as well. Like, while some people will probably say this progress is ridiculously slow, the conversations have been healthy.
You know, when I was on the MLK Human Rights Commission a few years ago, we took up the topic of Negroville near Moab in Grant County. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe as an African-American person. I even called Washington, D.C. to figure out what the heck is going on, to find out that there were 7 other monuments around the nation with using that particular descriptor. And I was so relieved when finally that was changed here in Utah, and I was always surprised at the fight that we had to wage in order to make this happen. Similarly with Dixie State, this is Utah, it's not even the South. I have no idea where that came from, and as a person who, I have lineage in Mississippi, and they don't have it there. It has always been surprising, but as you guys have just described, finally, in the 21st century, we're advancing in our thinking, we're being more sensitive, and to leave those vestiges of racism and discrimination, the names like Dixie State, to have the names of mascots after Native Americans, it is, to me, a sign of progress, and I'm glad to see it. I'm just sorry it took so long.
Mm-hmm. Before we leave the legislature, one interesting bill with a high-profile advocate this week. There are a lot of treatment centers in the state of Utah where people from all around the country come for various needs to get some help. But Matt, there have been a few stories on this, right? Yeah. And we had a big visitor to talk about this week. Yes,
Paris Hilton, a celebrity. She was a resident at Provo Canyon School in the 1990s, and she says she was abused there. And she documented that in a film that she released this year, and she came out here for a rally, and she came out here to testify at the legislature about a bill from Senator Mike McKell, which so far has had no opposition, which would put restraints on, or put limitations on the use of drugs on teens to make sure that they are compliant, to lock them in seclusion rooms, to hold them in restraints, to put them in stress positions. I mean, we wouldn't let this happen to inmates in our state prison, and yet this state has allowed this to happen to teens in treatment centers. It's unbelievable that it's taken this long to have this conversation, and when we've had it, the treatment centers are in favor of this. Mm-hmm. Everybody's in favor.
So I'm going to start where Matt left off with it's taken so long. So this is a substantive bill. I'm glad it's not seeing opposition. Credit is due to Paris Hilton bringing her celebrity to this and ensuring that it get passed. And I really appreciate those who have influence using their influence. I do want to take a moment, though, to talk about the Twitterpation at the legislative session about having a celebrity up there. And I love that the word Twitterpation has Twitter in it, because the social media that I saw these starry-eyed legislators loving Paris Hilton and talking about how well she did, which again, credit is due there. What I hope to see in the next couple of weeks is more stories from legislators about everyday Americans or everyday Utahns who are showing up these committees, who actually have something more to lose because they live in the communities in which they're speaking of. There are some amazing testimonies that go on from Utahns during the session. And while I appreciate us shining a bright light when Paris Hilton speaks, I would also suggest that this bill has been around for a number of years. There have been a number of advocates that have been working on this who are articulate and emotional, and they're Utahns, and I would encourage our legislature to make them celebrities in addition to taking the selfie when someone comes into town.
That's good. That's good. Let's jump to the federal level for just a moment. I know, there's so many things on the table. There is an impeachment proceeding going on in Washington, D.C. But Jason, I want to get a comment from you, because this is my observation. Utah has been part of this. We've had both of our senators, Mike Lee and Mitt Romney, have been part of the evidence, and even our own governor, Spencer Cox. It's just so interesting to see this national proceeding with Utah faces. Talk about that.
And what's interesting to me is the diverging ideas they have, with Mike Lee and Senator Romney having different points of view. And then Governor Cox, even before he was governor, diving into this. And now since he has been elected, continuing that dialogue. I guess I'm proud of our state for having, strong feelings about this. Though whether or not, you disagree or not with whichever, lawmaker we're talking about, we know now that we have influence, and that if we can continue to use it in a positive fashion, we become a bigger player on the national stage. So I'm very grateful for that. But I'll be honest with you, it's kind of a lot of theater involved in this whole process, as I've been watching in the news and on television. And I'll be interested to see how it actually turns out, because there's still a lot of partisanship involved in this, and depending upon which side of the aisle you're on, and to see at least this discussion being had in a serious way tells us that we can at least have adult conversations about it. Whether or not we agree on the outcome, that'll be a different story.
Matt, I want to talk about the Mike Lee part for a moment. When it came to the constitutional question, whether or not you could hold a proceeding for a former president, Mitt Romney was one of 6 Republicans that voted yes, we can proceed, and they are proceeding. But there's some interesting things with Mike Lee on this one. Phone calls from President Trump while it's going on, like maybe mistaken phone calls. What happened right there, and why is Mike Lee staying even now connected to that Trump administration?
He grew increasingly tight with the Trump administration as that term went on. And on January 6th, when rioters were storming the Capitol and they had not yet evacuated the Senate, Mike Lee got a phone call from the president, and it was a mistake. The president was trying to reach Senator Tuberville, a new senator from Alabama, and just accidentally called Mike Lee. Our senator gave Senator Tuberville the phone and sat there and watched, and the senator told reporters about it, including a reporter of the Salt Lake Tribune. And multiple reporters published it. That became evidence. There was a story that said that the senator overheard the content of that conversation, and that's what Senator Lee is disagreeing with, but not that it happened. It's a weird case. The senator is also now working with Trump's attorneys on this. Mike Lee has already said what he thinks about this. He thinks it's an unconstitutional trial. He's said how he would vote. So I guess, at the end of the day, the idea of him talking to the lawyer doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's an interesting case.
Maura, we've got about 20 seconds. Give us a final take on this.
So let's talk about the political maneuvers we should be watching. Right now, we have the spectrum of elected Republicans in Utah that are showing us the fight for the Republican Party, right? Spencer Cox, who was a lightweight Trump supporter, is now saying we got to look at this guy. Lee seems to be doubling down on MAGA Nation, and we're going to use Utah as a litmus test for this, I think.
Thank you for these comments. So insightful today. Appreciate it. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast on pbsutah.org/Hinckley Report or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.